And regret is sort of a huge part of forgiveness, you know, dealing with stuff and facing it and taking responsibility. And pain is the great motivator to forgive, you know, and it's about looking at our pain. I'm interested in my parents' generation. Both my parents are dead now, but when I think about them, and this is a broad generalization, I think they didn't do any self-discovery, any sort of journeying inwards at all. They were very compassionate people, they were loving people, but they didn't look at themselves at all. And I think my generation, and certainly the ones younger, are much more up for it. And there used to be this thing, I don't know, that you couldn't go into therapy after about the age of 45 or 50 because, you know, you were stuck. I remember people saying this, you know, there's no point in having therapy after a certain age because you can't change. You're so sort of, I'm sure that was always wrong, but it was said. And so I think it becomes very important. And I would say that the forgiveness, shall I just ramble on, or have you got another question?
No, go.
Right.
Yeah, carry on.
The Forgiveness Project shares if any of you have looked at it, as a journalist, I did specifically choose quite extreme stories of atrocity to do with abuse and crime and conflict. And it's nuanced in its approach, because there's nothing more dangerous, I think, than pushing and promoting forgiveness and telling people they must forgive, and if they don't, they've failed in some way. So many of the stories, you know, they explore those nuances. They don't all come to a place of forgiveness, but they all have one thing in common, and that is drawing a line under the dogma of vengeance. And they all are fighting against the hateful instincts in their lives. So I'm very nuanced when I talk about forgiveness in terms of crimes and big hurts and abuses. You have to be. It's not right for everyone.
No, I was going to ask you whether there was ever a situation where there was something that was just unforgivable. Have you come across anyone that you just couldn't engage
Well,
with?
it's personal. I mean, you know, there's someone, Eva Kor, who was a survivor of Auschwitz.
Yeah.
She forgave, you know, first of all, her own abuser, you know, the captor, and then all Nazis, you know, and people took a great offense at that. But she said, I do it for myself. I'm not doing it for anyone else. And I'm not doing it because they deserve it. I'm doing it because I deserve it. You know, so everyone's different. And for some, I mean, Rami Alahan is one of the storytellers for the Forgiveness Project, and his daughter was killed by a suicide bomber in Israel. And he says, I do not forgive and I do not forget. But the suicide bomber was a victim, like my daughter, grown bitter through poverty and shame. And he's you call him a very forgiving man. He talks only about peace and about connection and about building bridges with other bereaved parents in Palestine. And he's an extraordinary person, but he doesn't like the word forgiveness. So, you know, I find forgiveness a very interesting subject because not everybody is comfortable with it. And it means many things. But what I was going to say is that when it comes to personal relationships, you know, our everyday lives, our little grievances, I think forgiveness is kind of the oil of personal relationships. And I think holding on to resentment has a cost. And unforgiveness, if you're carrying around a lot of anger and resentment and bitterness, you will find ways of expressing that in the world. And also, if you're holding on to a lot of self-loathing about yourself, you will find ways of self-destructive behavior, you see. And I do think it's very useful, and I speak from, you know, looking around me and from my own personal experience. And I know that, and there's also a lot of research out there to show that having a forgiving mindset is very good for your health. It ties in with a lot of research around depression and anxiety. That basically forgiving people have better relationships, they're happier. And you know, you can see why. It makes total sense because you're able to let go of those ruminations, all those things that you're hanging on to all those conflicts, all those wrongs done to you. Because another thing that I love is, I'm sure many of you know Brené Brown's work. She's done a lot around vulnerability, but she says something has to die in order to forgive. And what she really means is, it could be anything actually, but it could be our righteous assumptions, our righteous anger, our assumption that someone must continue loving us because they used to, our assumption that we cannot move forward with someone because they never said sorry, our expectation that people should behave as we behave. And if you hang on to that, it can keep you stuck, I think. This is what I've seen anyway.
Yeah. And I think that you've sort of touched on it as well, about the intergenerational response to this self-forgiveness, forgiveness outwards. Our parents, our grandparents, mostly were quite held people, weren't they? They come through the trauma, as you say, of the Second World War and First World War. My grandfather was harboring a lot of that right until the end. But I think that's where the courage comes in, doesn't it? That you were brave enough to start this project, which I imagine you must have had, as many people that went to see it and were inspired by it, you must have had a bit of a negative reaction as well. And having that courage to push through and do something that you know is right.
Yeah. I mean, there's been less negativity around it than I thought, because it is contentious subject, contested territory. And I think people make assumptions. There was a therapy group once who would refuse to read my book. Well, one woman in it refused to read my book. It was a book group, sorry, and she was a therapist, and she said, I'm not going to read a book that suggests that my clients must forgive. So she hadn't read it, she hadn't even opened it, because actually that is the last thing we are saying. Nevertheless, we are putting out these stories and we are saying, consider this. We are saying, let's have a conversation about it. This is a place of inquiry and exploration. But because the stories are so nuanced, because not all of them do end up at this, place of forgiveness, which can be seen as fixing everything, which is not necessarily the case at all. One day you can forgive, and the next day something can trigger you can hate all over again. I think that's why we haven't received as much pushback. There is the assumption that we are a Christian organization always, which is why I think when you said the description, you said secular. I do make that point, because we tell the stories of all faiths and none.
That's really important. And I like what you say as well about forgiveness not necessarily being the destination. We're all happy clappy and let's all get on. So for you, what would you say forgiveness looks like? What is? Yeah.
Forgiveness to me looks like making peace with things you cannot change. It's a sort of surrender, and it's freedom, and it's liberation. And many have framed it in that way. When I say it's contested territory, it's contested because some people say you can only forgive when you receive remorse, apology, and it's a sort of mending of two relationships. So it's more like reconciliation. But many people say that's wrong. It's an act of self-healing and self-compassion. And that if you wait for someone to apologize, you may be waiting forever, and therefore you're still inextricably linked to the source of the pain. But for me, it's an endlessly fascinating and enduring subject and complex, as you said.
Yeah.
How do you get there, Marina, in terms of forgiveness? So if someone has wronged you or perceived wrong, or someone's done something atrocious, killed a member of your family, committed an awful crime, it sounds great and I totally get everything that you're saying, to let go. It releases yourself from all, holding on to all of that. It doesn't serve us. But and in my head, the idea of it, oh, brilliant. But how do you go about doing that?
No, it's a good question, and I'll only speak from the many people I've talked to, because I don't hold myself out as an expert in that way, and I certainly don't go along with what many people do teach, 5, 6, 7, 8 stages of forgiveness and certain pillars of forgiveness, although they're useful. They may very well be useful if you have the intention of wanting to forgive and can't. So there are all sorts of processes. But from the stories that I've collected, it varies, obviously. It often takes decades. It can be instantaneous. For those that it would take decades, it maybe people come to a point where they have to look to do something differently because what they're doing isn't working. And then something may trigger it. It's quite interesting. It is often an event, but it comes after an exhaustion, I would say. And that event will be a moment of empathy. And if it's instantaneous, and there's very few than that, it surprises the very people. So another example from the Israel-Palestine stories that I collected, a woman called Robbie Damelin, who's an Israeli whose son was killed by a Palestinian sniper. And when the police came to the door to tell her, she said, "I'm surprised. The words that came out of my mouth were, 'Do not take revenge in the name of my son.'" It wasn't exactly forgiveness, and she's very interested in forgiveness. She says it's such a gray matter, she says. But again, like the other person I mentioned, she has a deeply forgiving mindset and attitude, and she fights to bring peace to the world and not to have a hateful, vengeful attitude to life. So she's not exactly instant forgiveness, but she's instant compassion.
Isn't that as well an acknowledgement perhaps of herself as a mother being delivered this tragic news that her child has died, thinking, I don't want another mother on whatever side or wherever to be in receipt of this news and this feeling. So there's a generosity of feeling about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's the forgiving mindset. But the more vengeful mindset, and maybe there's no right or wrong, it's interesting to think of it like that, is to think, I need to get justice for my child, and I will get that by conflict, carrying on the conflict.
I think we all experience that, don't we? Intellectually and hearing stories about other people. But if someone were to hurt my child, you would find them buried in a wood somewhere. It's that connect, but trying to maintain that sense of empathy and calm.
And it's very often about, I do not want to be like them. I will not hate. Because I do not want to be like the source of the pain. I need to do the complete opposite. So therefore it becomes a sort of cleansing, a detachment, a removing yourself from the pain. So that's why I say pain is the great motivator to forgive.
And you were going to write,
I just wanted to ask you about self-forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me as well, as we grow older, we've all, I'm sure, done things we're not proud of, or hurt people, or something in the folly of youth. I look back on certain things, I think, oh God, I would never do that now.
Or even as parents.
Or as parents. As parents. What, to forgive ourselves for being terrible parents? So this thing of self-forgiveness, can you forgive yourself without apologizing to others?
And well, I think you can. It's not always easy to whoever it was may not be around anymore. It may have been well in the past what you're holding on to and what. I mean, it's about self-compassion, and I think it goes back to this thing of it's very easy to bury stuff that we've done. I mean, when we were preparing for this, I was thinking of a family relative who caused a lot of damage. Leaving a 1-year-old, divorce, has grown-up children now, and has never apologized to them. And I think it's because he can't acknowledge what he did. And therefore, if you don't recognize what it was the harm that you may have done? How can you even go towards self-forgiveness? So the first thing, I think, is to look inward and to acknowledge, and you might do that through talking to friends, through therapy, through any other meaning-making process. But I think that's really important. But it stems from, you have to have compassion for yourself, then you can have compassion for others. You have to forgive yourself, then only through forgiving yourself, I think, are you able to forgive others. But I'm a great believer in apology. It's not always received. I've apologized to someone who refuses to accept my apology. And then I had to let it go. It took years. And I apologized 5 times. And at the end of it, I thought, I've done enough. I let it go. But it was quite an interesting process.
Yeah, apologizing 5
Being
times.
blanked. You know, there's so much of this going on. Families not speaking to each other, blanking people, cold shoulders. And I know, you know, for very little, because people won't behave as we want them to. And sometimes have to say, it's really important. Desmond Tutu is very good on this. He says, you can forgive and renew a relationship, or you can forgive and release a relationship. Some relationships are not good for you and you have to walk away, but it doesn't mean to say you can take he says, you know, it doesn't mean to say you take all the bitterness and anger and venom with you. He says you can leave that behind as well.
That's interesting, isn't it? It's okay if you fall out with someone or something to, you know, go, actually, I forgive you for that, but this friendship's over, or this has sort of run its course, as some relationships, friendships do in one's life. And I was thinking about the art of the apology as well, because I'm sure we've all received apologies, those apologetic non-apologies. I'm sorry, but you know, whatever I said that triggered you, or you know, I mean, what's a good apology? And surely it's just, I'm really sorry, you know, for what I did. It's
hard to tell, isn't it? Because I think you know it. If it's happened, I think you would know it unless someone is a brilliant actor. And you know if it's lip service, and we know politicians and such like who do it, and they feel, you know, they're just doing it to save their skin, and whether they mean it or not. I know that Australia has an apology day for the Aboriginal people, which is interesting, and a sorry day. And I was speaking to actually an Aboriginal pastor just the other day, and he was saying it does make a difference. It's not because from the outside it does look a bit lip service and just doing their duty, but actually said no, because the Aboriginal people were so destroyed by what happened to them. They had that identity removed, and there's nothing more destructive, damaging than that. And this is an acknowledgement that it happened. And that is the first sort of step to healing. Well, in fact, he said to me, the wound is so deep, it cannot be healed. And he said, that's why all we have sometimes is forgiveness, which I thought was a very interesting take on the word forgiveness, on the process, I sometimes struggle with what is it, you know, what is forgiveness? The ability, the gift, the skill, I don't know what it is. But anyway, he said forgiveness could be very useful when nothing else works.
And it's a good opener as well for a narrative, for a discourse, for a conversation about what has happened. If someone genuinely is apologizing, then it brings you to a level you can talk about it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And to be witnessed, to be acknowledged, to be heard, to be apologized to, it is it's an act of compassion that moves the story along. And I think that's what forgiveness does. It changes the outcome. It doesn't change the past, it can change the future, it can create new possibilities. It's a very sort of creative, dynamic space